Picture this: you are a woman alone, her face smudged with soot and fear, with 3 small children clinging to the folds of her worn dress. The rain is a cold, merciless sheet, turning the forest path into a slick river of mud that sucks at your worn-out boots. Behind you lies nothing but the smoldering ghost of a life you once knew, the ashes of your home and your kiln, all of it taken by a man who believes he owns the world and every person in it. Ahead of you, there is only the deepening gloom of the woods, a vast and unforgiving wilderness that promises nothing but more cold, more hunger, more despair. What do you do when the path back is gone forever, and the path forward leads to nowhere? What do you do when hope itself has become a luxury you can no longer afford? This was the world that had collapsed upon Eliza. Every rasping breath she took was a battle against the scream building in her throat. She could not afford to scream. She could not afford to weep. Not with 8-year-old Thomas clutching her hand, his knuckles white and his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own. Not with 5-year-old Lily stumbling beside her, her small sobs lost in the howl of the wind. And certainly not with baby Samuel bundled against her chest, a precious, fragile weight that was both her anchor and her only reason to take another step. They had walked for a day and a night, fueled by a single loaf of bread and the primal instinct to flee the fire and the man who had lit it. Mayor Thompson. A name that was a curse on her lips. He had wanted her land, the rich veins of clay that ran through it, the very earth she had shaped into pots and urns to feed her children. When she refused to sell, he had simply taken it, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the chilling echo of his laughter. The forest was a maze of dripping leaves and tangled roots. The sky, a bruised purple, offered no direction. As twilight bled into true night, a profound and terrifying cold began to seep into Eliza's bones. Lily stumbled, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Eliza gathered her up, her own muscles screaming in protest, shifting Samuel to one arm. She was now carrying 2 of her 3 children, her strength failing with every step. Thomas, ever her stoic little man, simply tightened his grip on her dress. "Are we there yet, Mama?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Eliza's heart fractured. She had no answer. There was no there. There was only here, lost and drowning in the dark. It was in that moment of absolute surrender, as she sank to her knees in the mud, ready to let the forest claim them, that she saw it. Through the thick curtain of rain and the skeletal fingers of the trees, a flicker of light. A single, golden eye in the oppressive darkness. A lamp in a window. The cabin was small, built of thick, dark logs, with a plume of smoke rising bravely from a stone chimney. It looked like it had grown from the forest floor, a part of the ancient landscape. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was painful, surged through Eliza. With the last of her strength, she staggered towards the light, her children a heavy, precious burden. She reached the solid oak door and raised a trembling hand to knock, the sound swallowed by the storm. She knocked again, harder, a desperate, frantic rhythm against the wood. The door creaked open, revealing a man who seemed carved from the same wilderness as his home. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a landscape of hard lines and shadows cast by the lantern he held. A long, silver scar ran from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, pulling his lips into a permanent, grim set. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were guarded and cold. He looked at Eliza, at the children, and his expression did not soften. This was Silas. For 10 years, this cabin had been his world. The forest was his congregation, the wind his only conversation. He had come here to forget the sound of a woman's laughter and the weight of a small child in his arms, memories that had once been his life and were now his torment. He had built walls not just of wood and stone, but of silence and solitude, to keep the ghosts of his past at bay. And now, a ghost of a different sort stood on his doorstep, drenched and desperate, with the very things he had sworn to live without, a family. His first instinct, a harsh and protective reflex, was to shut the door. To preserve his sanctuary. To keep the pain out. But then he looked past the woman's terrified face and saw the children. He saw the little girl, her lips blue with cold. He saw the boy, trying so hard to be brave, his chin quivering. He heard the faint, mewling cry of the infant wrapped in wet blankets. Something inside him, a part he thought long dead and buried, stirred. The memory of a fire. Of loss. He knew that look in the woman's eyes. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. He let out a slow breath, the air fogging in the cold. Without a word, he stepped back, holding the lantern high to light the way. "Get them inside," he growled, his voice a low rumble, like rocks grinding together. It was not a welcome. It was a command. A surrender. The inside of the cabin was sparse and impeccably clean. A fire crackled in the hearth, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. A simple cot, a wooden table, and a few shelves holding books and tools were the only furnishings. It was a space built for one. Silas watched as Eliza carefully laid the sleeping Lily on the rag rug before the fire, her movements slow and tender. She unwrapped the baby, checking him over with a practiced, maternal focus that felt alien in this fiercely masculine space. Thomas stood stiffly by the door, his eyes darting from the strange, scarred man to the fire, to the shadows in the corners. Eliza finally looked up at Silas, her eyes pools of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. We have nothing to offer you," Silas merely grunted, turning to stir the pot hanging over the fire. "There is stew," he said, his back to her. "Eat. Then sleep." He did not ask for their story. He did not want to know. He had let the storm in, but he would be damned if he let it settle. The days that followed were a quiet, delicate dance of boundaries. Eliza, a woman of fierce pride, refused to be a burden. Once the storm broke and the sun streamed through the tall pines, she explored the small clearing around the cabin. Her potter's eyes scanned the earth, her fingers crumbling the soil. Near a small creek that ran behind the cabin, she found it. A deposit of rich, red clay. A new hope, raw and fragile, took root in her heart. She approached Silas that evening as he was splitting wood, the rhythmic thud of his axe the only sound in the twilight. "There is clay by the creek," she said, her voice steady. "If you would allow me, I could build a small kiln. I can make pots, bowls. We could trade them in town. I will earn our keep." Silas paused, his axe resting on the chopping block. He looked at her hands, no longer delicate, but stained with dirt and determination. He saw not a supplicant, but a survivor. A creator. He gave a single, sharp nod. "There are bricks from an old chimney behind the shed," he said, and turned back to his work. It was all the permission she needed. The construction of the kiln became a silent partnership. Silas, with his brute strength and knowledge of stone, helped her build the foundation. Eliza, with her artist's touch, shaped the firebox and the chamber, her hands moving with an old, familiar grace. The children, slowly thawing in the warmth and safety of the cabin, began to bring life back into Silas's silent world. Lily would leave small, carefully arranged bouquets of wildflowers on his workbench. Baby Samuel's gurgles and cries, which Silas had initially found grating, slowly became a part of the forest symphony. And Thomas, quiet, watchful Thomas, began to shadow the big man. He never spoke, but he watched Silas sharpen his axe, set a snare, and read the tracks of deer in the soft earth. One afternoon, Silas was carving a small bird from a piece of scrap wood. He finished it, smoothed the edges, and without looking at the boy standing a few feet away, he held it out. Thomas hesitated, then stepped forward and took the small, wooden bird, his fingers tracing its delicate wings. A silent understanding passed between them, a bond forged without words. Silas found himself watching Eliza more and more. He watched her knead the clay, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw the way she soothed Samuel with a soft lullaby, the same one his own wife used to sing. He felt the walls around his heart, so carefully constructed over a decade, begin to crumble, brick by painful brick. One evening, she had fired her first batch of pots. They sat cooling in the moonlight, their shape simple but perfect. She held one up, a small, humble bowl, and her face was illuminated by a smile so pure and radiant it stole his breath. "It is not much," she said softly, "but it is a start." Silas looked from the bowl to her face, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the ghost of a smile touch his own scarred lips. "It is whole," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He was not just talking about the bowl. He was talking about her, about the light she had carried back into his darkness. The piece, however, was as fragile as unfired clay. One day, a man on horseback rode into the clearing. He was barrel-chested and wore the insignia of the town guard, his eyes small and greedy. He worked for Mayor Thompson. "I'm looking for a woman," the man sneered, his gaze sweeping over the cabin, lingering on Eliza as she stood protectively in the doorway. "A thief. Ran off with 3 brats." Silas stepped out from behind the cabin, holding a freshly sharpened axe. He was an intimidating figure, a man who belonged to the wild woods, and he radiated a quiet menace that the town guard was not prepared for. "There's no one here by that description," Silas said, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. "You're on private land. I suggest you move on." The guard's bluster faltered under Silas's unblinking stare. He saw the axe, the scar, the sheer, uncompromising stillness of the man. Muttering a curse, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, but the threat lingered in the air like poison. The outside world had found them. Mayor Thompson knew she had survived. It was only a matter of time before he came to finish what he had started. The sanctuary had been breached. The confrontation came on a crisp autumn morning. The air was still, the trees a riot of red and gold. The beauty of the day was a cruel mockery of the ugliness that was about to unfold. Mayor Thompson did not come alone. He arrived with 4 hired thugs, men whose faces were hard and cruel. Thompson sat astride a fine black horse, a sneer on his fleshy face, a rolled-up document in his hand. "Eliza, my dear," he called out, his voice slick with false charm. "Hiding in the woods like a frightened rabbit. Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Eliza stepped out of the cabin, her face pale but her spine straight. Her children were behind her, peeking around the doorframe. "This is not your land, Thompson," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You have no power here." Thompson laughed, a nasty, grating sound. He unrolled the document. "On the contrary. This deed proves that this entire stretch of forest, including this pathetic little shack, belongs to me. You are squatting on my property. And I am here to evict you." But then another figure emerged from the cabin. Silas. He moved to stand beside Eliza, placing himself between her and the threat. He was not holding an axe this time. He was simply there, a mountain of a man, his presence more powerful than any weapon. "She is not a squatter," Silas said, his voice a low growl that carried across the clearing. "This is her home. And this is my land." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "And who are you? Some half-wild hermit who thinks he can stand against progress?" It was then that Silas did something he had not done in 10 years. He spoke his own name, a name he had tried to bury. "My name is Silas Croft," he said, his voice ringing with an authority Thompson did not expect. "My father settled this land 60 years ago. The deed is filed in the capital, not your corrupt little town hall. This land is mine. And this family," he said, with a slight turn of his head towards Eliza and the children, "is under my protection." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Thompson's face, but it was quickly replaced by rage. He was a man who understood only force. "I don't care who you are. Get them," he roared at his men. The thugs spurred their horses forward. But the man they charged was not a hermit. He was a force of nature. Silas moved with a speed and ferocity that was shocking. He sidestepped the first horse, pulling the rider from his saddle. He used a fallen log to trip the second mount, sending its rider sprawling. He was not fighting with hatred, but with a cold, focused purpose. He was protecting his home. He was protecting his family. As two of the thugs dismounted and rushed him, Eliza screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. She grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from beside the door and swung it with all her might, catching one of the men squarely on the side of the head. He went down with a groan. At that moment, young Thomas, seeing his mother and Silas fighting, acted on pure instinct. He grabbed a bucket of wet, sticky clay and hurled it with surprising accuracy, covering Mayor Thompson's face in a thick, goopy mess. Blinded and sputtering, Thompson lost control of his horse, which reared and threw him unceremoniously into a mud puddle. His authority, his menace, was gone, replaced by the pathetic absurdity of a powerful man covered in mud and clay. His remaining men, seeing their leader humiliated and their companions defeated, lost their nerve. They helped him to his feet and retreated, dragging their groaning comrades with them. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breaths. The threat was gone. Eliza dropped the skillet, her body trembling with adrenaline. Silas stood, his chest heaving, watching the riders disappear back into the trees. He turned and looked at her, at the fierce, beautiful woman standing amidst the remnants of the fight. He looked at Thomas, standing tall with an empty bucket. He looked at Lily, peeking out from behind the door, and heard Samuel start to cry from inside. In that moment, the last of the walls around his heart crumbled into dust. The silence he had once craved now felt empty. The solitude he had mistaken for peace was now just loneliness. He walked to the cabin door and looked at the space that had been his refuge from the world. It was no longer just a cabin. It was a home. He saw the pots cooling near the kiln, the small wooden bird on the windowsill, the wildflowers in a jar on the table. He saw the life they had brought into his exile. He looked at Eliza, his eyes, once the color of a winter sky, now holding the warmth of the hearth fire. "The children are frightened," he said softly. Their home was attacked. Eliza met his gaze, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yes," she said. "Our home." The word hung in the air between them, a promise. A truth. The wandering woodsman was no longer wandering. The broken potter was no longer broken. Together, with 3 small children, they had taken the shattered pieces of their lives and, like clay on a wheel, had formed something new. Something whole. Something called a family. What truly defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through our veins, or the bonds we forge in the crucible of hardship? Is a home built from wood and nails, or is it constructed from courage, loyalty, and the quiet promise to stand together against the storm? We have all felt lost in the woods at some point in our lives, searching for that flicker of light in the darkness. We have all faced men like Thompson, who seek to take and to break. But the story of Silas and Eliza reminds us that even in the deepest wilderness, even from the ashes of our greatest losses, we have the power to rebuild. We have the power to find our own clay, to build our own kiln, and to create a life of meaning and love. Who has been the Silas to your Eliza, or the Eliza to your Silas? Who stood with you when the world tried to tear you down? Share your stories of the found families that have made you whole in the comments below. Your experiences give all of us strength. And if this story reminded you of the unbreakable power of the human heart, please give this video a like and subscribe for more tales of hope and resilience.